It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Stephen Jett. He's been a member of the church for many years, and I found some biographical material on the internet. So, yeah, and I very rarely approach the internet, but I was glad I did. Stephen was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and I found that a wonderful thing to find out because I had already chosen Mary Oliver's reading, and Mary Oliver was also born in Ohio, a small town. Some of her biographical material says that Mary was born in Cleveland, but I trust the small town that's mentioned in this book. Stephen graduated cum laude from, I believe it was Princeton. I can't believe I failed to put that down, but that's what I recall. And he majored in geology, and he later got a PhD in geography from Johns Hopkins. He taught geography at Ohio State University and then the University of California at Davis for approximately 36 years. He and his wife, Lisa, live in Abingdon. His major areas of scholarship include Navajo history, material culture, scenic resources, sacred places, and place names. Among his many books, he wrote Navajo Place Names and Trails of the Canyon de Chelly System of Arizona, which I read when he introduced it to us a couple of years ago, I believe, and I enjoyed it very much. So it's my pleasure to introduce Stephen Jett.
Thanks, Diane, and thanks for reading that book. I think you're one of the few. The book she's talking about was published in 2001 and never had a single review. They messed up on the title page with the authorship, and I had a bit of a row with them over that. And the thing is pretty much sunk from sight, but it was a great project, I think. Yesterday afternoon, I made an outline, a handwritten outline for this talk today, and then this morning after breakfast, I started typing it up, and I was going to just do an extemporaneous thing with that outline. Any of you who are writers know that sometimes it's the writing takes over, and I ended up writing a narrative. And it occurs to me that I think I will, rather than just extemporize, I will read this narrative because it's a fairly complex story. I'm simplifying it in this account, but it's at least if I read it, it'll keep all the facts in order and straight and make the points I want to make, and then we can be more spontaneous during questions if there prove to be any. So I will do it that way. In 1970, 50 years ago, as of the 22nd of next month, the first Earth Day was held. I had arranged for the executive director of the Sierra Club, David Brower, to address the crowd where I worked, UC Davis. How did I know Dave, Mr. Conservation? It was back 4 years. It went back 4 years to the big bang of the modern conservation movement, during which Dave transformed the Sierra Club from a modest outings organization to a huge powerhouse of preservationism, one that used the modern tools of research, lobbying, full-page advertisements, and other public relations to promote its position. And by the way, I'm pleased to see that Harry got the picture of the cover of the recently released David Brower biography, which is quite a balanced account, I think, of his life. Since the 1920s, huge dams had been proposed and a few built to regulate flow along the Colorado River for purposes of, quote, reclamation, unquote, which means irrigation development. As a 27-year-old faculty member at UC Davis, it came to my attention that Arizona was pushing for 2 high hydroelectric dams in the Grand Canyon and that the Sierra Club was in opposition. I was no activist, but dams in the Grand Canyon, for heaven's sake? That was too much. So, having done a dissertation on scenic resources and tourism development in the Navajo country, I volunteered to the club what expertise I possessed and was added to the Grand Canyon task force. Early in 1966, Reader's Digest published an anti-dam article and in April held a conference for reporters at the Grand Canyon South Rim. It was intended for anti-dam presenters, but was crashed by dam proponents such as Congressman Morris Udall, Arizona Congressman, California Water Attorney Northcutt Ely. He was the éminence grise, as they say, the power behind the throne in developing Colorado River water policy to favor California. And Senator Barry Goldwater. In his speech, Goldwater stressed that the proposed Wallapai Dam would abut the Wallapai Indian Reservation and that the impoverished 900-member tribe would be paid $16 million. Yeah. He said nothing about the Marble Canyon Dam, which would abut the Navajo Reservation. So during the Q&A, I asked him about that, and he acknowledged that the much more numerous Navajos had not been consulted, much less offered payment. That struck me as most unfair. In May 1966, Dave Brower was gathering a team of expert witnesses to testify at upcoming congressional subcommittee hearings. I was at a conference in Reno at the time and was notified to go to the airport as soon as the meetings ended and to fly to D.C. to be at the Capitol by Monday morning. The DuPont Plaza Hotel was Dave's headquarters for strategizing. There, our group wasn't called to testify until Friday, but that gave me time, working out of the office of Smithsonian head S. Dillon Ripley, to get statements from various scientists and from the chairman of the Navajo tribe, as well as to reschedule my testimony so as to be able to rebut the pro-Wallapai archaeologist who was to testify. This was during the Civil Rights era, and the pro-dam folks were rounding up other Arizona tribes, but not the Navajo, to support the dams, and were implying that to be anti-dam was to be racistly anti-Indian. I pointed out that there were far more Navajos in Arizona than Indians from all the other tribes put together, and that the Navajo chairman had authorized me to object to the omission of the Navajos in all this, and that hydroelectric dams might compete with Navajo coal and uranium sources for power generation, and would damage the local scenic tourism trade. My presentation came as a shock to those accusing opponents of racism. No legislation was forthcoming at the time, and additional hearings were scheduled for the following year. Early in 1967, the attorney for the Navajo tribe, Norman Littell, contacted the Sierra Club. The pro-dam Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall, was trying to fire him at the time. Littell was also concerned about the non-consultation concerning Marble Canyon Dam. The club flew me down to the reservation in a 4-seater plane where I spelled out the dam issues for Norman and flew him over the spectacular Canyon Dam site. Impressed, he determined to organize opposition in the tribal council. I suggested that 3 huge new Navajo tribal parks be created along the Colorado, and that was approved by the council. Also approved was a strong resolution opposing the dams. In Washington, the dams were looking increasingly iffy, opposed by, among others, the powerful Washington Senator Scoop Jackson. Seeing the handwriting on the wall and also having taken a float trip down the canyon, Studall, that's Stuart Udall, we call him Studall and Modall, to distinguish. They're brothers, of course, from east central Arizona. Studall adopted a no-dams plan dependent on Navajo coal power plants to generate electricity in support of the proposed Central Arizona project. The Central Arizona project was a huge thing that Arizona had been trying to get for decades. What the purpose of it was to bring by canal Colorado River water from the eastern border of Arizona all the way into the Phoenix area and ultimately to the Tucson area. Ostensibly, it was to allow irrigation to provide water for that. Of course, they were irrigating water-wasting crops like alfalfa and so forth, totally economically crazy except for government subsidies. But that was the main thing. And, of course, the covert reason for this was not to irrigate, but was ultimately for those water rights to be taken over by urban development. So that's a bit of the background. And these dams, the proposed new dams, were intended to generate hydroelectricity both to power the pumping of the Colorado River water to central Arizona, and to also selling hydroelectricity to the cash registers to pay for this Central Arizona project. Some in Congress wanted at least the Wallapai Dam, so there were more hearings in the spring of 1967. I presented the case for the Navajos and overheard someone say that the Marble Canyon Dam was now a dead duck. The would-be dams were never built, and Navajo coal from Black Mesa fired 2 plants. The Navajo Generating Station at Page. Anybody been to Page and seen that? Couple. And the Mojave Power Plant, which was on the lower Colorado River, that supported the Central Arizona project, and which has since been built. The Central Arizona project is now in operation, has been for some time, but without any dams, and originally using that coal to provide the electrical power. Power lines went all the way from Page in Arizona all the way down to Phoenix and beyond. This was made possible only by a development in technology of electrical power transmission. Used to be you couldn't transmit it very far, but now you can. And all these grids that interconnect and so forth, and it can be done. The mines and the plants were not ecologically desirable either, but they are now all closed and Grand Canyon remains intact. I want to point out a book. This book just came out last year. It's called Dams, Deals, and a Noble Myth, Saving Grand Canyon. And it recounts a lot of this, what I'm telling you about now. Of course, I'm telling you from my personal point of view, but a lot of that's included in here, too. It's sort of fun to be in the history books now. I hope it doesn't mean I'm history. At any rate, I don't agree with everything he says in here, but he got a few things wrong. But hey, after the hearings were over, Dave Brower and I took the train to New York to call at the New York Times. He had things to talk with him about. He was buddies with Mr. Oakes there. And I tried to promote to the paper as well that they investigate this story about Norman Littell and Stuart Udall. Here's an aside. Littell had been a government attorney in the Roosevelt regime back in the 1930s, and at some point in time he became the tribal attorney for the Navajo tribe of Indians. Appointments of attorneys to the tribal governments had by law to be approved by the Secretary of the Interior, which Stuart Udall became in the Kennedy administration. The Littell, he really did mess too much in tribal government, I have to acknowledge. He was supportive of what was called the old guard of the tribe, the tribal council, as opposed to the progressives, so-called. The progressives were more or less the non-traditionalists and the more aligned with liberal politics, and the old guard was more conservative, more traditional in terms of Navajo culture, and so forth. And Littell definitely favored them, and manipulated them quite a bit. Udall didn't like, of course, not having the liberals supported by Littell, and he wanted to get rid of Littell. He took the position, did Udall, that if appointment of a tribal attorney has to be approved by the secretary, then the secretary can withdraw that approval and get rid of the attorney. To my mind, the tribe should have the right to choose any attorney and keep any attorney they wanted to, and they didn't want to get rid of him. So I thought this was worth exposing. But the New York Times, they did send a reporter out to see me in California, but nothing ever came of it. There's no story about it. And it's something that history has not really taken note of, that Udall-Littell conflict. And I dare say that probably was one factor in Littell's opposing the dams, because Udall supported the dams. It's very, very complex when you get into these, all the nuts and bolts of these political issues. And not everything is black and white. We like to think of Stuart Udall as a great hero in conservation, and he was in many ways, but he's also very pragmatic, and he was trying to get stuff for his state development. He did take a trip down the river through the Grand Canyon, did Udall, and apparently that had quite an impact on him. Just as flying Littell over the Marble Canyon dam site, if you see that place, you can see why it would be sacrilege to build anything in there. Anyway, on the train up to New York, Dave and I were talking about a book project that he already had underway, and it was going to be one of these coffee table books with photographs and then a text by an author that he had used before. Dave edited the Sierra Club exhibit format series, big picture books. But this fellow who was scheduled to write this thing, apparently he had a drinking problem and he never produced. So Dave was telling me about this on the train, and I said, well, Dave, I could write a text with that. And so he said, okay, go ahead. So that was another thing that came out of the little trip. Here's the book. Maybe. Another thing that came out of the whole experience was that it really gave me the sense that an individual or a small group of dedicated individuals can really make a difference in the large-scale picture, with sufficient knowledge and organization and commitment. So that has stayed with me, and I can no longer say I'm not an activist. So I'll leave it at that and solicit questions from you.
Let's give him a nice round of applause.